There is water in your left boot. You noticed it an hour ago, and there is nothing to be done about it. You are standing on a wooden step cut into the front wall of a ditch in eastern France, and your chin is level with the ground. In front of you the dark goes on. Then there is wire, then more dark. Past the second dark is another ditch with other men in it, doing what you are doing, which is nothing, carefully. It is January of 1918. The sector you are in has a name among the French who handed it over, and the name is Quiet. Quiet means an agreement nobody signed. You do not fire on them, they do not fire on you, and the war goes on somewhere else. The American Army is here to learn. What you are learning is that a night is longer than a day, that a man cannot sleep standing up but will try, and that the cold comes through the boots before the coat. A flare goes up from the other side. It hangs, very white, then drops. You do not move. The question tonight is not whether you would have fought. Nobody in this ditch is fighting. The question is whether you would have lasted the night. This one, and the one after it, and the 11 after that before anyone comes to take your place. If you are warm and lying down and nearly asleep, you are in the right position for this. Let's stand to. One thing before we go down into the line, and then I'll leave you alone for 2 hours. If it is dark where you are, say so below, your town, and what time the night has got to. I read them. Now get comfortable. Pillow where you want it, blanket up over the shoulder. Where we are going, a man slept in his boots with his mask on his chest, and counted himself lucky to sleep at all. Nothing here is dramatized or invented. Every detail comes from what these men and their army wrote down at the time. The road to the line begins on the 15th of January, and it begins in snow. You leave the training villages before the light is full. The column strung out along a road under ice, with everything you own on your back. The order of march is the only part of the day that goes as planned. Toward noon, a heavy rain sets in and turns to sleet. The rain gets into the pack, and the pack gets heavier by the mile, and nobody stops for a hot meal. Noon is a sandwich, eaten walking. On the hills, the horses cannot keep their feet on the ice. Whole teams go down together, and when a gun will not take a grade, the men get on the ropes beside the horses and pull. The infantry walks past them and keeps walking. By dark, the regiments are in the villages assigned to them for the night, and some of them have covered 32 kilometers since morning. Your feet have been wet since before noon, and they stay wet in the billet. Sitting in that billet with your boots off, you can count the moves it took to get here, and every one of them was slower than the one before. There was a ship, and a port, and a train, and a winter in stone villages, and now this road. Nothing on the way arrived when you were told it would. That is the pace of the war you have joined, and the road to the sector is only the latest lesson in it. The ship came first, the summer before. The convoy crossed in 12 days, with the destroyers closing in near the far side to lead through the water where the submarines work, and the port at the end of it was Saint-Nazaire. The first men ashore were met by silence on the quay, and later by bands, French and American by turns. The camp was a march out of town, barracks put up in haste by German prisoners, without the comforts later divisions would find here. The first thing you did on French soil was march with full pack, in heat, with the overcoat buttoned to the throat, because the French would judge the American soldier by the first ones they saw. Then the train, and it was not a sleeper. It was a French boxcar with a stencil on the door that said 40 men or 8 horses, and the stencil meant what it said. Your platoon rode with the doors rolled back, up the Loire Valley and through the middle of France, and the train stopped more than it moved. Nobody told you where it was going or when it would get there. You learned to sleep sitting up against the man beside you, which is a thing you will do again. 2 days and 2 nights later, the train let you out in a country of stone villages. And the villages were your barracks for the winter. Officers got rooms. You got a garret, a hayloft, a cow stable, or the open side of a shed, and a number stenciled by the door said how many men and how many animals the house could hold. There was no fire in the garrets. In front of every house on the street stood a squared heap of manure in a shallow stone pen. And you learned that this was the family bank. The French taught you. They had 4 years of trench war behind them, and they showed you a thing, and you did it back until it was right. And they were as eager to teach as you were to learn. You dug practice trenches in stony ground and worked in them at night on purpose, so that the dark would be familiar before it mattered. In the trenches, they sounded a gas alarm without gas, and counted while you got the mask out and on. After that, the mask hung on your chest wherever you went, and it got in the way of everything else. Neither rain nor snow changed the schedule, and there was no time to walk back to the billet for a hot meal. The first winter came before the wagons did. Whether you crossed with the regulars in June or a season behind them with the New England Guard, the winter found you the same way. Sleet nearly constant, the roads in mud, and the men walking to the railhead to carry flour and bacon and coffee back on their shoulders. Firewood stood 2 or 3 miles off. You cut saplings in the snow and carried the bundle home in your arms without gloves. And in the billet you sawed it up and burned it green, and the smoke got into your eyes. If you are of the 26th, your first turn in a trench comes in another sector, beside French battalions, and the road to Toul is a later road, at the end of winter, in rain and snow by turns. You get 2 days of rest in a country the war has not touched, with whole houses and fresh milk, and then the order comes to move again. On the day you leave, the order is changed 9 times. Supply falls behind on the road, and there are days when the men and the horses both miss a meal. Either road ends the same way, at night on purpose. You do not rest in the villages and go up fresh. You go up straight from the road in the dark, so that the other side sees nothing move on the way. A French division on your right has been told to supervise the relief and settle you in, and its officers have walked this ground ahead of you. You go in by battalions, each to its own piece of the line, and the men who held it before you come out past you in the dark. You hear them more than you see them. Boots and equipment and low voices going the other way. By the time it is light, the sector is yours, and you have not seen it yet. Nothing that was promised on the way here has arrived on time. And the line is no different. It will show itself a piece at a time, in daylight, and not all at once. What came in with you from the road is what you will have here. A rifle, a pack gone heavy with rain, and a pair of boots that have not been dry since the first morning out. Daylight shows you where the road has put you. This is the Ansauville sector, some 25 kilometers northwest of Toul, and the line runs from the east edge of Seiche-Pré across to Bouconville. In front of you, the ground falls away into the Vauvroux, a wide flat plain with villages and patches of woods and shallow ravines in it. The villages and the woods are German, and they hide batteries and billets and rest camps you will never see. Off to the right front, out of the plain, rises a single hill. It is Mont Sec, and it stands nearly 400 feet above everything around it. From its top, the other side looks down on every road and every village behind your line for miles. It is the reason nothing moves back here by day that does not have to. The French call this a rest sector, and the phrase has a meaning that no one writes down. Each side treats the other with consideration. Shelling the other fellow's villages is not done, because it would be answered at once. Divisions that are worn out are sent here by both sides to recover, and they do the minimum of fighting that keeps the state of war going, and the real business is to live as well as possible in deep dugouts. The defenses are not well kept up, and a good part of the artillery is old pieces of position, guns of a pattern not meant for a sector where serious fighting is expected. The agreement is kept because it suits everyone and no one ever signed it. What the French leave you is a position made over many years, and not all of it good. Until now it was held by the 1st Moroccan Division, one of the most famous in the French army. Behind the line there is a deep system of trenches and wire and gun positions in the ravines, and the wire in front is in good repair. But along the forward line the ground is so low that the trenches could only be dug shallow, and they are largely full of water. Dugouts that will stand a direct hit are nearly absent. In Beaumont and Seiche-Prey, a few cellars have been fitted out, and the shelters in the trenches themselves are of the most illusory kind. The sector is organized the French way, in centers of resistance, a battalion to each, and each of them split into strong points, a company to each. The 1st Division holds this ground with a single brigade in the line, and the other brigade waits in the villages behind. The forward line is not a continuous trench with men all along it. It is a string of posts in the wet ground with the combat groups in them, and the real line of resistance lies about a mile behind, on a low ridge along the highway that runs from Saint-Dié toward Metz. The French call the ridge line position 1 bis. Between the ridge and the forward posts there is a country road and a communication trench, and everything that goes forward or back at night goes by them. Between Seiche-Prey and the Rue Mier Wood the communication trench is not a trench at all in places, only a corridor between walls of sandbags and wicker baskets filled with earth. Between the ridge and the posts there is only the one country road and the one boyau, and traffic in both directions shares them. A second trench comes out of the Rue Mier Wood, crosses the ravine on the right and joins the French in the wood beyond, but it was dug as a fighting trench and serves badly for getting anywhere. And its far end is not in your division's ground at all. The posts themselves are held thinly. By the time the Yankee regiments hold this ground, Seiche-Prey has a single company in the village and another in the wood beside it with their machine guns, and the rest of the battalion sits well back in the forward trenches of the main position. No man's land in front of you is not a fixed width. In places the lines come within 50 yards of each other. The country in between is bare field with coarse high grass, marshy in every hollow, without a tree except the poplars along the Metz road, and the thin stand of the Rue Mier Wood on the right. The relief is finished on the 21st of January. The battalions of the 1st Brigade go into their centers of resistance by night, in turn, and the Moroccans come out by the same communication trenches. At midnight on the last night, the sector stops being French and becomes American, and nothing in the ground changes. The French do not hand the sector over all at once. The general of the French division on the right keeps the responsibility for its defense until the 5th of February, and only then does it pass to the American division commander. Until that day, the sector is American in the line and French on paper, and the orders that reach you come down through both. Rotation is the shape of your weeks here. At the turn of the month, the battalions in the forward line come out, and the reserve battalions of the brigade go in, and the ones who come out go back to the villages in reserve to sleep under a roof. The machine gun battalion, when it arrives, keeps a company in the line and a company in reserve, and swaps them every 7 days. The line is always held, and the men holding it are always a little different. Behind the ridge, the roads sort themselves by what the hill can see. The ridge road runs from Beaumont toward Fleury, and the back road goes from Beaumont through Mondreux and Ansauville and Amonville to the highway at Mesnil-la-Tour. Mesnil-la-Tour, in its fold of hills, is the working center of this end of the sector, and the headquarters of the division moved up to it on the 18th of January. The regiments keep their headquarters in the villages, the 16th at Ramboucourt, the 18th at Beaumont, the brigade at Ansauville. The quiet sector is not quiet in the way you were told. The division finds it neither quiet nor restful from the start. The cold, the frequent rains, the roads gone to mire, the ground a swamp, and the agreement does not survive your arrival. When the Germans, by their usual schedule, drop a few shells near an American command post, the infantry commander declines to accept it and orders a concentration of artillery on a German town. Repeated, this ends the unwritten laws of the sector. From then on, the other side shells what it can reach, and a bend in the back road that used to be safe to linger at is not. At the end of March, the 1st Division is called north, and the Yankee Division comes in from another sector to take the line. It takes over a wider front than the 1st had held. From a brigade of the 1st, a French division and a French regiment, and no American division has held a sector as a whole division, under its own command. Before this, on the 3rd of April, the command passes to its general, and the sector is given a new name now, after Book, the muddy hill town where the headquarters sits in an old chateau. In the line between Seicheprey and the wood, the communication trench is still a corridor of sandbags and baskets of earth. It is still dark in the corridor of baskets, and it has been dark for a long time. You have not undressed tonight, and you will not. In the Yankee regiments, the day's work in the front line really ends at dawn, and up to that moment, through the whole night, everybody is dressed and armed and at the alert. That is the rule you have lived under since the light went. Comparatively few men are actually in the trench with you. Some of each company are always out on detail, mending wire, setting new wire, improving the ditch. Others are out on patrol, and the men left on watch wait for the small sounds that tell where a patrol is. A correspondent who came up to the Ansauville line one January night describes what that dark is made of. It was not raining, but moisture seemed to drip from everything, and the vapor off the ground mixed with the fog overhead until the moon was nearly gone. In that grayness, sight and smell lose their keenness, and familiar objects take on unnatural forms. From somewhere ahead came dull, muffled thumps in the mist, which he compared to old cushions being beaten out in spring cleaning, and which were the guns. At an engineer's dump, the fog thickened into helmeted figures moving in mud knee-deep, carrying boxes and planks and bundles of tools, and total silence covered all of it without a ray of light. Those figures are the night's working parties, and their hours are the measure of yours. the colonel who showed the correspondent a line of Americans digging in the fog, explained the routine. The parties came up after dark, worked all night, camouflaged every sign of New Earth, and were gone before daylight, leaving nothing for an airman to find. That is the whole arrangement of the night. What can be done in this sector is done while it cannot be seen. The last of it is done now, in the hour you are standing in. So they come in the dark just before the dawn. The tired men come silently back along the trench and put away their tools, and the roll is called to make sure nobody is missing. The corporal keeps the list of who went out and where, and he reads it low. Then everybody stands to on the fire step and stays there through what the regimental historian calls the most probable hour for an attack. You stand with the rifle in your hands and your chest against the wet wicker, and you look out at nothing. All night the flares have sailed up, from one side or the other, and they still go up. Nobody speaks. The hour itself is not written down in the histories of either division. It is the hour before light, and in the middle of winter that hour comes late and lasts. The manual for the non-commissioned officer does not know the word stand to. It knows a time of challenging between the evening call and reveille, when the sentry is to be especially watchful and to halt everything that moves near his post. It knows that the new outpost generally goes on duty at daybreak. The book was written for open country, not for a ditch in the Wavru, but the shape it describes is the shape you are standing in. The night ends when the day's sentries take over, and not before. The cold is the part the book leaves out. You have been on your feet in it most of the night, and now you are standing still. Which is worse? The helmet is cold where it touches, and the rifle is cold through the glove, and the wicker is wet through the coat. The water in the bottom of the trench has not risen or fallen since the last time you looked at it. Your breath shows, and the man's beside you shows, and that is the only movement on the fire step. Along the bay the rifles lie across the parapet, the way the correspondent saw them that January, and the men behind them look into the gray. Out past the wire the fog lies on the field at the level of the parapet, and the field is as wet as the trench, and the two are hard to tell apart. Then the gray comes into it. It does not come from any direction you can point to. The fog simply goes from black to gray, and the nearer things arrive before the far ones. The wicker wall in front of your face, then the posts of the wire and the wire between them. The field, which is level with the trench and in places a little higher. Last and far off, the shape of the hill the other side holds, from whose summit they can watch every movement behind your line for miles. Its height belongs to the map, not to this hour. When you can see the hill can see you, and the night is over. That is why the standing ends when it does, and not at any clock. In this sector it was hazardous, the divisional historian writes, to be abroad up front at any hour between daybreak and dusk. The first day in the line taught that lesson, and the lesson holds. So the moment the light is good enough to shoot by is the moment the order comes down the trench, passed in a low voice from man to man. You step down off the fire step. The day's sentries are posted, a few men at the loopholes and the periscopes, and everyone else is below the parapet, will stay there until the light goes again. A battalion commander at Ansauville told the correspondent that January that it had been a good night. He had not seen it so quiet, he said, in 3 years. That is what a good night is here. The working parties come in with nobody missing. The flares go up and show nothing, and the light arrives without anything arriving with it. It is also what most nights are, in January and after. The sector is called quiet because of mornings like this, and standing through them does not make it feel that way. The quiet is something you are awake for. All of it. Every night you are in the line. Daylight comes, and with it the ration-carrying parties down the line. With the marmites full of hot breakfast, the news of the rear, and perhaps a newspaper. The marmite is a tall lidded can that keeps food warm for part of the walk, and breakfast is mostly coffee. The tired men eat as best they can, the regimental historian says. You eat standing or sitting on the fire step with the mess kit on your knees. The light keeps coming up while you do. Then the trench goes quiet in a different way. By twos and threes, the men who were out all night crawl into their shelters. The day sentry settles at the periscope, and the men who are not sentries and not yet asleep sit low against the wall with their collars up. The fire step where the company stood an hour ago is empty except for him, and the tools, counted and stacked, lean against the wicker wall until dark. Nobody has said a word since the step. The coffee in the marmite was water an hour ago, somewhere behind you, and that is the last easy water you will see today. What you carry is the canteen, a flat metal flask in a cloth cover, hung from the belt with its cup beneath it. The manual for the non-commissioned officer has a good deal to say about the canteen, all of it written for the march, not for a ditch. It says the canteen should always be filled before starting out, and that, except possibly in very hot weather, one canteen of water should last the entire day's march. It says to use the water very sparingly, to take a few mouthfuls at a time and wash out the mouth and throat, and that old soldiers never drink when marching. The book is not describing your day, but the flask is the same flask, and the day is the same length. The book is also particular about where the water comes from. Canteens are not to be refilled on the march without authority from an officer, because the clearest water, whether from a well, a spring, or a running stream, may be very impure and the source of many camp diseases. When canteens are to be refilled, it is done by order, and a detail is made for it. One man in each squad sent with the squad's flasks. Where the commanding officer has ordered all drinking water boiled, the book says, "Be careful to live up to the order." None of this is written with Lorraine in mind. All of it applies here. The Army's rule in France goes further, and it is a rule of the whole Army, not of this sector or this month. Drinking water is to be chlorinated or boiled. An engineer officer is named as water supply officer, and his duty is to locate water points, improve them, and put signs on the nearby roads saying where they are, what the medical officer found when he tested the water, and what restrictions apply to its use. The water carts are not to crowd the point. That is the system on paper: a tested well, a sign on the road, a cart, a detail. In the line you see the end of it, which is the flask. A correspondent who came through Ansauville in January describes what that end looked like. The battalion had rested 2 days in the mud of the ruined village, several miles back of the front, and a broad, shallow stream. Then at the flood, wound through and over most of the village site. Anyone walking near its edge came away carrying pounds of black, tenacious mud, and dogs, hogs, ducks, horses, and men were all painted the same color with it. That is what he tells you about the water of this sector before anything else. There was a great deal of it, and it ran through the houses. Later, in a battalion commander's dugout up the line, the Major was glad enough of visitors to send for another bottle of what the correspondent calls the murky gray water that came from a well close to his post. It was poured out as hospitality, and it was what there was. The water of the line at Ansauville that January came out of the ground gray, was carried in bottles, and was offered to guests by a major. It is the only glass of drinking water in this sector that anyone wrote down. And it is the water you are drinking. That is the arrangement you live inside. Water everywhere, and almost none you can put in your mouth. The stream is in flood through the village. The trench you stood in at stand to is a ditch with water in the bottom of it, and the field beyond the wire is as wet as the trench. Men in the wet sectors of this front wrote that water oozed from the mud everywhere, and that a long trip was still necessary to get any for drinking, cooking, or washing. You can stand in it to the boot top and be thirsty. The two kinds of water do not meet. The drinking kind comes up at night, the way everything comes up. A battery of the Yankee Division in this sector that spring kept its water cart among the wagons of the echelon, in the same list as the ammunition caissons and the rolling kitchen, because water is a category of supply like shells. In the 1st Division's account of a later line, the water carts moved toward their companies with the kitchens as dark came on, and details went out with their cans to meet them at the limit of the approach. The last part of the way the water travels by hand in the same cans that carry the food. It arrives in the dark before the light with the breakfast, and at no other hour. There is a reason it comes with the dark and not after. In the sector the Yankee Division held in February, before it came here, the men were told plainly that they must husband water and food, because the whole face of the hill was in plain view of the other side, and no ration party or water carrier could come down after daylight broke. A man alone might cross the open slope by day without drawing a shot. A party with cans could not. The same rule holds on any ground the other side can see, and the hill across this line sees most of it. So the water that is in the trench at daylight is the water the trench has until dark. A canteen that is emptied in the morning stays empty. The book makes the full canteen part of a man's kit in the way a rifle is. The leader of a patrol inspects each member before starting out and sees that he has serviceable shoes, a full canteen, one ration, and a dressing, in that order of mention. On the evening before a march, all canteens are to be filled, because there will be no time in the morning and men are told not to start out thirsty but to drink all they want at breakfast. That last piece of advice carries over into the line. You drink at breakfast from the marmite, because breakfast is when the water is there. After that, the flask is rationed by the same arithmetic as the march. A mouthful, and the mouth rinsed, and the cap screwed back on. Most of the water you drink today, you will drink as coffee, which settles the question of boiling without anyone having to order it. The coffee comes up black in the marmite and is poured into the canteen cup, and the rest of the day's water is whatever the flask holds. Washing is a separate matter with its own hour and its own water, and shaving is another, and neither comes out of the canteen. The flask is for the mouth. When it is light enough to see the parapet clearly, the detail that brought the cans has already gone back down the trench, and the next water is tonight's. You hang the canteen back on the belt. It is a little lighter than it was at dusk, and the cup goes back under it, still warm from the coffee, and rattles once against the flask before it settles. The cover is wet from the trench wall, and it will not dry today. The kitchen is not in the trench. It stands somewhere behind you. in a barn or a shed or under the trees, wherever its smoke can be hidden from the balloons. A battery of the Yankee Division kept its kitchen about 500 yards to the rear of the guns that spring, and the infantry kitchens sit further back still. In some sectors, no cooking at all is allowed forward of the woods. Everything is prepared in the rear and carried up after dark. The rule is the same for every unit here. Nothing cooks where the other side can watch it, so the hot food you eat today is made by men you will not see, and it comes to you on foot. The Army calls it a rolling kitchen. The men call it the soup gun or the slum gun, after what comes out of it. It is a firebox and a set of boilers on wheels, drawn by horses, and it travels with the wagons at the rear, one kitchen to a company. When the Yankee Division came down to this sector, their kitchens were hitched to the tails of trucks and dragged along the road at truck speed. Axles froze, and the rough road shook the slum guns to pieces. For a while afterwards, the cooks built their fires on slabs of stone and sheets of iron. There are two kinds in the Army's own language, the rolling kind and the stationary kind, and the school the course opens later for its mess sergeants teaches the construction and care of both. On the train down from the other sector in February, a Yankee battery carried its kitchen on an open flat car, and at each 15-minute halt, the cooks boiled coffee on it, handed it down along the cars, and watered the horses from the same buckets. That was the last time the kitchen and the men were in one place. The cook works from a manual written before the war, in a language of garrison ranges and boilers. It tells him how to bring stale bread back by wetting it and setting it in the oven for half an hour. It tells him to toast the hard bread and drop it into the soup before it piles up unsold. It tells him to scour the coffee boiler with ashes or soap. The manual has no page for a kitchen on wheels in the mud. The cook learns that part himself. On paper, your ration is exact to the ounce. The garrison table allows fresh beef, potatoes, beans, coffee, sugar, and salt, and for bread either the soft loaf or 16 ounces of hard bread. The travel table and the reserve table are leaner, built around bacon, hard bread, and coffee. The field ration has no table of its own. The manual defines it as the reserve ration plus whatever can be bought or found. That last clause is the one you live under. What arrives in the line is slum. Slum is the stew, whatever went into the boiler that day, and the word covers a great deal. Beside it there is bacon, beans, bread when the bread comes up, and the tin of corned beef that the whole army calls corned willy. The travel ration sets that tin at 12 ounces, and the soldiers' newspaper prints jokes about how long corned willy can last. The hard bread is called hardtack, and it earns the name. The manual treats the reserve ration as an exception. In peacetime, a company ate it and cooked for itself on perhaps 3 days in a year, as a drill. Here the hardtack and the tin are the ordinary diet of any move, and the reserve tin of Argentine meat has a name of its own, monkey meat, which the French gave it before you came. Men eat it when there is nothing else, so you buy what the French canteen sells at cost, jam and butter and cheese, and you spread them on the ration to make it fit to eat. By day the sector looks empty. Nothing moves on the roads because the balloons along the front are always up on clear days, and a column on a road is a target, so the shape of it is the same wherever a line is held. As dark comes on the kitchens and the water carts move toward their companies, details go out with their cans to meet them at the limit of the approach, and the men carry the food the rest of the way by hand. In this sector, by spring, the arrangement is better than that. The Yankee regiments in the Toul line get 2 hot meals a day and hot coffee at midnight, carried down by the food details after dark. That is the spring. In January, the meal that comes up in the dark is the meal. The marmite is a sealed can with a lid that clamps, and it holds stew or coffee for a handful of men. In the line, no company ever has enough of them. Where they run short, the cook pans go up with a pole through the handles, or the food is poured into tall galvanized cans like milk cans and carried by the grips. These are heavy and awkward, and on a dark trench floor with the boards missing, a man slops out half of what he carries. The men on the detail are taken from the same platoons that stood watch all night, and they go back up the same trench with the empty cans before light. The food that reaches you is what survived the walk. It is cold because of the walk. The kitchen is well back. The path is a communication trench that does not run straight, and the detail halts at every bad place. A lid clamped down on hot meat keeps in the heat, and sometimes spoils the meat before it arrives. In the line, what reaches you cold, and the water in the can is warm. When the carrying parties cannot get down at all, the line waits until the next night, 24 hours on what is in the haversack. You eat from the mess kit, a hinged metal pan with a lid that serves as a plate. Your tools are a large spoon and a knife, 2 in all, because the fork is usually reported missing. The newspaper's column on mess manners tells you what every man already does. Lay a slice of bread down as a plate for jam or cheese, or the overflow of beans, and keep the bacon off the rice. Afterwards, the kit should be washed in hot water at the kitchen. In the line, there is no kitchen and no hot water, and the kit is wiped with a crust and packed back into the haversack. Coffee is the one thing that always comes. The manual fixes the cook's allowance of ground coffee per man and tells him not to throw out the grounds after each boiling, but to keep them for 3 meals. So the pot stays strong. It reaches you in the marmite, black, sugared if there was sugar, and cooler than it left the fire. You drink it from the canteen cup, and you leave a mouthful at the bottom to rinse the cup out with. The same column that settles the mess manners says to blow on it, and that the spoon is left standing in the cup to cool it. The cup is tin, and it burns the lip before the coffee is cool enough to drink. The spoon stands in the cup while you wait. You set the cup down on the fire step and look at what you are standing in. The trench is a ditch, and the ditch is full of water. And this is not an accident of the week's weather. The position was laid out when the Germans fell back in 1914, and the ground it runs through is the low, wet floor of the Voivre. The division's history says the ground along the French front line was so low that only shallow trenches could be dug, and these were largely filled with water. You inherit the ditch as you inherit the line. The water in it is colder than the air, and it does not move. What the French hand over has been worked on by both sides for 3.5 years. The wire in front is in good condition. The trench itself is another matter. Long stretches are lightly held, and between Sèche-Pré and Rue Maillard-Wood, the line is in places only a corridor between walls of sandbags and gabions. Shell-proof shelters, the Yankee Division's historian writes, may be said not to have existed. The cellars of Beaumont and Sèche-Pré hold a few, and in the trenches the shelters are of the most illusory description. What is solid here was built in stone before the war. What was dug is what you are standing in. In the wettest part of the sector, the trench is not dug down at all. It is built up. The correspondent who walked the Ansauville line in January describes a trench whose floor was level with the field around it, and in places higher, with walls of large wicker cylinders filled with earth and stones that rose almost to the height of a man's head. Any cut in that ground, the guide told him, would simply be a ditch brimful of water that could not be drained. The manual's parapet, 30 inches of earth on top and sloped so a shell skids, is built here from baskets. Behind each wall, the field is as wet as the path between them. From the rear you come forward by the communication trench, the boyau, which the manual wants dug in zigzags or broken by traverses so nothing can fire down its length. The French wicker holds the sides fairly well. The floor is duckboard, a slatted wooden walk laid over the water, and every 8th or 10th board is missing. At each gap you either step knee-deep into cold water, or you jump, and in the dark, you learn where the gaps are by memory. The correspondent's companion, who wore shoes and puttees, abhorred these breaks. The water in the gaps is the same depth all winter. Farther on, there are longer patches where the boards are gone entirely, and the wading is knee-deep, where shells have struck, or where the ground has thawed. The revetments have been pushed inward and the way narrows, so that a man with a pack turns sideways to pass. The manuals traverse a block of earth at least 6 feet wide left standing across the trench, makes the path a series of corners. You stagger from one slanting corner to the next, and the water goes with you. The corners are where the boards go first and where the water stays longest. The manual has a picture of what all this should be. A trench that is going to be lived in gets drainage, it says, and water laid on, and niches cut in the forward wall for the cartridges. The top of the parapet is sodded or covered with grass so that it does not show, and no stones are left on it. For head cover, it offers a sandbag set on the parapet beside the loophole, or a small side niche roofed with planks and earth. On this ground, the drainage has nowhere to go, and the rest of the picture is built out of baskets. A battalion of the division went into this line in January with 1,000 or more men, and each of them, the correspondent says, was in for a long tour in trenches knee-deep with melted snow and mud. He calls the ground a battle-battered bog and shell-punctured swampland. The weather that winter was cold, with frequent heavy rains. The roads became sloughs and the country a mire, and on the sunniest days, there was still mud underfoot. A boot keeps the water out until the water is higher than the boot. It did not dry out with the season. A battery of the Yankee Division that came into the sector in spring found its gun pits and trenches under water and named the place the Swamp Position. In the unfinished dugouts, the water stood 7 or 8 feet deep, and in the main trench it reached the top of the hip boots. Across the line, the Germans sat on the high, dry ground of Monsec, in what the battery's historian calls comparative luxury. That is the arrangement of the sector. They hold the hill, you hold the marsh, and their trenches drain downhill toward yours. The same battery kept 4 pumps going steadily all day. At night, the water rose almost to the level of the bunks, and in the morning the pumping began again. This is what a night does to a trench on this ground. Rain falls on a floor that cannot drain. The walls soften, a stretch of revetment bulges, and by stand to, the water is higher than when you left it. A thaw does the same thing more slowly and more thoroughly, because it loosens the walls as well as the floor. So the trench is not a thing that was dug once. It is a job that the rain cancels every night and the working parties do again. The division's history says infantry and engineers alike were employed repairing existing trenches and constructing new defenses, and that the division dug trenches, established strong points, built wire, and opened new communications behind the front. The engineers built dugouts and posts of command, quarried rock, and mended the roads. In Seicheprey, they turned the village into a strong point. On the Ansauville line, the correspondent came to a place where recent shelling had changed 20 feet of trench into a gaping gully almost without sides, waist-deep in water. A working detail was there with spades, rebuilding it. That is the scale of the work. Not the line, but this stretch of it, tonight. In the Yankee regiments, the night working party goes out to mend wire, put up new wire, and improve the trenches. And that is how the night passes for the men who are not on watch or patrol. Tomorrow night there will be another stretch. The manual lays out the digging as a relay. A shift works while the other rests, and the tools go out at 3 shovels to a pick. In the line, the shovels fill sandbags. The sandbags go onto the revetment where it has slumped, and the duckboards that can be found go back over the water. The work stops at the first gray light when the party comes in, and the tools are counted. Through it all, your feet are wet, and they stay wet. Drying them is a procedure, and it belongs to a later hour. The water in the boot is the same water as in the trench, and the trench is the same water as the field. By spring, the water will still be there. 2 lines face each other across the same low ground, and theirs is the dry side. The pump handle is cold in the morning. The day's work in the front line ends at dawn. That is how the men of the Yankee Division put it when they hold this ground in the spring, and the sentence is exact. Once the light is full and the day sentries are posted, 1/2 of the platoon is told it may lie down in the sector the division held in February. Before this one, the order was the same. 1/2 of each platoon told to lie down and sleep if it could, the rest to keep the watch. Breakfast is eaten where you stand, and nobody takes anything off to do it. Then, a few at a time, you crawl into the trench shelters and sleep like logs through the brightening morning, the way men slept here in April when the New England regiments held the same line. The shelter is a hole in the forward wall with a blanket across the mouth, and it holds 2 men if neither of them turns over. You sleep in your clothes, in your boots, with your belt on. Nobody undresses at the front. The men who wrote about it afterwards said so in those words, and meant the whole of their time in the line. The respirator rides on your chest in its bag, where the orders say it must be, and where it must stay while you sleep. Some men use it for a pillow instead, which the orders say they must not, and which the officer who wrote the regimental history noticed and set down. The rifle leans where your hand will find it in the dark of the shelter. 1 blanket pulled over the head, and the day goes on without you. Not everyone gets the shelter. The gas orders prefer that men who sleep in the forward trench sleep on the fire step itself, out in the open air, because the gas that comes is heavier than air and settles into holes, and because a man on the step can be woken quickly. So some of you sleep sitting on the step with your back to the wall of the trench, and the overcoat skirts wrapped over your knees. Beside the sentry, by the same orders, there is always a man awake and a man asleep, and they change places every hour. To wake the men in the dugouts, the sentry does not shout. He kicks the water bucket set by the entrance for the purpose, because his mouth has to stay free for the mask and his hands to put it on. As the sun climbs, the sleep gets heavier, not lighter. The man who wrote it down said that toes sticking out from under the blankets felt the warmth and curled back into shelter, and that every man who passed along the trench went quietly. It is the only time of the 24 hours when the trench is quiet by agreement rather than by order. The mud does not dry, even in the sun, because the ground is too low and too wet for that, but the planks steam a little, and the sandbags on the parapet go from black to brown. By noon or 1 o'clock, the men are tumbling out again. Nobody sounds a call for it. The shelter's simply empty, because a body that has been cold for a night cannot sleep through a warm noon for long. What follows is cleaning up, and it is done with whatever water is nearest, and the nearest is never the canteen. In spring, when the division that follows yours holds this line, the men wash their faces in their mess kits. They shave at small metal trench mirrors stuck on twigs in the parados. The rear wall of the trench, with cold water and whatever soap is left. The officer who watched them said they kept marvelously clean, and that he never understood how. Then the rifle. The manual says every part of it must be kept free from rust, dust, and dirt, and that a dirty rifle is a sure sign of a soldier who does not know what he holds. The bore is cleaned from the breech, never from the muzzle, with the brass rod and a patch of flannel, and then oiled, and no emery paper and nothing that scratches goes near it. A rifle that has been fired must be cleaned not later than the evening of the same day, or it will be rusted by morning. In a trench where the rifle is wet every night whether it has been fired or not, that means every day. The French officers who first watched this division in the line wrote down what they thought of its discipline and its dress. And then they wrote one more thing. The rifles were clean. The rest of the afternoon belongs to small repairs. Puttees come off, are wrung out, and are wound back on. Boots are not taken off for long, because the water in the bottom of the trench does not go anywhere by day either. Anything that is wet and can be hung is hung on a nail in the revetment, where it does not dry but stops dripping. What you do not do by day is move. The whole of this ground lies under the eye of the hill to the north, and the slope behind the trench is in plain view and easy range. So the ration parties and the water carriers do not come down after daylight. What reaches the line after breakfast waits for dark. Wire is mended at night, not by day. Heads stay below the parapet, and the periscope does the looking. There is one rule for the day, and nobody needs to repeat it. In daylight, the trench has to look empty from the other side. The manual built its trench for exactly that. The deep part is cut so that a man can walk along it without lifting his head above the parapet, and the fire step is the only place from which he can see out. For the sentry, it offers a sandbag on the parapet beside the loophole, or a small side niche roofed with boards and earth, so that what looks over the top is a slit and not a head. Mostly it does. The correspondent who walked this line in January found the sentries on the step with their rifles laid across the parapet, looking out into a gray fog that lay over no man's land at midday, as it had at dawn. Smoke from a fire would show where the line is, so there are no fires in the forward trench, and the breakfast coffee that came up hot is the last hot thing until night. In a quiet sector, the middle of the day is also the quietest part of it. There are sounds, and you learn to sort them. For now a man can hear the water moving in the sump at the end of the bay, and the scrape of a cleaning rod in the next bay down, and not much else. It is a long time until dusk, and the afternoon is spent the way the morning was, only awake. On the parados, at the height of a kneeling man, The trench mirror sits on its twig, with a single smear of soap still on the glass. The afternoon has a long way to go yet. Everything you own in the line is on you, and most of it stays on you. When the division marched out of the Gondru Corps area for this sector in January, the regimental history listed the load because nobody who carried it forgot it. 2 blankets, emergency rations, the shelter tent half, extra shoes, underwear, mess equipment, and entrenching tools in the pack, the rifle, the bayonet, the steel helmet, the gas masks, and the full belt on the man. The rain soaked into all of it and made it heavier. The history says the wet skirts of the long overcoats clung to the men's legs and impeded their movements, and that is the overcoat you are wearing now. It is wool, and it is long, and when it is dry, it is the warmest thing you have. When it is wet, it is the heaviest. In the forward trench, it is rarely dry because the water in the bottom of the bay comes over the top of an ordinary shoe, and the skirts drag in it. That February, the Soldier's newspaper ran a column of fashion hints for Doughboys, and it opened by saying that overcoats were being worn much shorter this season, by request. The joke was understood in every billet in France. 1 pair of scissors and the coat stops at the knee, and the quartermaster is not consulted. Below the coat, the legs are wound in puttees, the long strips of wool wrapped from the ankle to below the knee, and they come off only to be wrung out and wound back on. A man who wakes in the line puts on his puttees and his shoes before he does anything else, because he took off nothing else to sleep. The shoes are the heavy hobnail kind, and a man's shoes tell where he has been. In this sector, the ground is low and marshy, and there is mud underfoot on the sunniest days. So rubber boots are issued for the trenches and the gun emplacements, and the men wear them constantly. Some are hip boots. On a wet night on the duckboards, nobody is sorry he put them on, because a single slip off the boards can drop you in water to the knees. On your head is the steel helmet which this division put on for the first time in its earliest sector, in the autumn, and has worn on duty ever since. The broad campaign hat went out of service when the helmet came in, and the overseas cap took its place for the hours when the helmet is not required. Both the helmet and the cap are made in France, because that is where the division is. The soldier's paper calls it the tin derby, and says it is, after all, the most serviceable headgear for all-round wear in the war zone. You wear it on the step, and you sleep in it if you sleep on the step. On your chest, in a canvas bag, is the respirator. You carry 2 masks, a British one and a French one, because the division trained on both before it came here. The French mask is the spare. It is a flat thing of chemical-soaked gauze with glass for the eyes, hung on its strap over the shoulder, and you breathe through the cloth itself going in and going out, which makes it harder to breathe in and gives it a smell of its own. The British box respirator is the one you would want first. Folded in its bag, it is about 2 inches thick, and the bag sits high on the chest, strapped so that it cannot swing, with the flap loose so it can be opened at a pull. That is the alert position, and this close to the line, it is the only position allowed. Nothing else goes in the bag by order. Not tobacco, not letters, not the spoon. An officer inspects it daily, by a standing order in France, and the spare with it. The bags are the part of your load that the orders care about most, and the part you are least likely to use on any given night in a sector like this one. The rifle is the Springfield, and with the bayonet off it weighs a little under 9 pounds. It is the most accurate rifle in the world, the manual says, and it must be kept that way, which in a wet trench is a daily matter. The bayonet rides in its scabbard on the belt and comes out for the night. The belt itself is web, with pockets of clips across the front. The new pattern holds 100 rounds, the old pattern a little fewer, and in the line it is worn full and worn always. From it hang the canteen in its cover, the first aid packet in its pouch, and the bayonet. Behind it on the pack ride the mess kit and the cup, the condiment can and the bacon can, and inside them the reserve ration the manual says a man carries and does not open until he is told, bacon and hard bread, and the coffee and sugar that go with them. The pack is built so that the blanket roll can be dropped in a moment without taking off the belt. The straps that hold the roll unhook from the haversack and hook onto the belt behind, and the roll stays on the ground. The manual calls this discarding the pack, and it is why the belt and the food stay on the man when everything else comes off. What does not come up to the line at all is the surplus kit. It stays behind with the company in the rear, in a bag for each squad, packed by a diagram in the manual. Spare underwear and a flannel shirt, and the extra shoes with the socks tucked into the toes, and the shoes wrapped in the underwear. The entrenching tools go by squad too, not by man. A squad carries pickmatics, wire cutters, and 4 short shovels. The manual also lists soap, a towel, and the small sewing kit the Army calls a housewife, issued by the squad and not the man. What you actually have in the line is whatever of that list survived the march in January and the water since. Over all of it, when it rains, goes the slicker or the poncho. The manual issues the poncho to the man on foot and the slicker to the mounted man. But in France, the line between them is not kept. The soldier's paper noted that February that slickers were in great demand, and that the men who had taken the heavy black kind when it was issued the previous fall counted themselves luckier than the men who had chosen the lighter blue or drab one, which was colder. In the New England Division, the shortage before the line was of everything: clothing, blankets, shoes, to the point where whole platoons could not go out on the drill field in the mud because of the state of their shoes, and the men who did go out went in shoes still wet from the day before. That is the training area before the line. In the line, what you carry is what you came in with, and one thing you did not. At the mouth of the shelter, by the step, stand the rubber boots. The middle of the day in a quiet sector is the part nobody describes, because nothing in it can be described. The stand-to is hours behind you and the dusk is hours ahead, and between them the line asks only that you stay out of sight and stay awake. Men who have slept lie in the dugout with their boots on. Men who have not slept sit on the fire step with their backs to the parapet and wait for the light to change. The one thing there is plenty of is time, and the whole craft of the afternoon is finding something to put in it. The first answer is cards. The advice given to men crossing the ocean was to carry a deck in every pocket, because there would be nothing else to do on the way over, and the habit came ashore with them. In the dugout, the deck comes out on a blanket or a ration box, and the game runs as long as the light from the doorway lasts. A private's letter in the soldier's paper describes losing most of his pay at what he calls payday poker in the dump the night before. The corners of the cards go soft in the damp, and the deck stays in play anyway. The second answer is reading, and what you read is the Stars and Stripes. It is the official weekly of the American Army in France, written by soldiers for soldiers, and its first number came out on a Friday, the 8th of February, 1918. It reaches the line folded small, passed from hand to hand until the creases wear through. A man reads it the way he reads nothing at home, from the masthead to the last advertisement, because every line of it is about his own army and nothing else is. The paper costs money and the money is arranged so that the company benefits. A subscription for the soldier runs 4 francs the quarter, and a share of every subscription goes back into the company fund once enough men have signed up. So a sergeant goes down the dugouts with a list, and the men who sign are paying for their own baseball bats and their own candles. What they get for it is news from the other sectors, news from home, and the baseball scores from a season being played without them. There is a particular thing in that paper about the censor, and the men read it closely, because every one of them has had a letter handled by him. The first number carried a long piece on how the censorship worked. It said, in plain words, that the censor had no interest in a man's debts, his morals, or his girl. He wanted to know only where the man's unit was and where it was going. The third answer, and the one that fills more hours than either of the others, is tobacco. The quartermaster counted, that spring, that about 95 in every 100 men of the army smoked, and the rest are simply men who do not. Tobacco is issued, not bought, and it comes in the government's own olive drab packets. You draw it, you roll it, and you smoke it in the dugout with your hand over the end, because a lit cigarette on the fire step in daylight is a thing the other side can see. The issue itself is small, and the men know its size exactly. The ration that spring is 4 ounces of tobacco, drawn all at once and meant to last until the next issue. And a man who smokes heavily is short before then, so tobacco becomes a currency. A packet from a parcel at home settles a debt at cards, and a man who does not smoke is a man with something to trade. When the huts in the rear run short, it is tobacco and chocolate they run short of first, and those are the 2 things they cannot bring up in daylight. Between the cards and the tobacco runs the afternoon's real occupation, which is talk, and most of the talk is rumor. The soldier's paper set out the kinds of rumor in a column that spring, and it counted 3. There were the wicked ones, which came from the other side, or from men who liked to frighten. There were the dangerous ones, which guessed when and where the division would move next, and which the censor would cut from a letter. And there were the harmless ones, about when pay would come, where the top sergeant was being sent, and how old the new second lieutenant really was. The paper's own view was that the men needed no warning about the first 2 kinds. They knew, as it put it, that they would know when they knew it, and a wild story without the marks of truth did not travel far. The third kind was the sport of the line, the ground of bets and arguments that ran from one stand to the next, and were never settled. Of all the rumors, the ones about leave are the most carefully kept. They have a true thing at the bottom of them. In February, the first party of American soldiers on leave went down from the trenches to a resort town in the Alps called Aix-les-Bains. They left the line on a Thursday evening and rode the whole of a day and a night to get there, still in their steel helmets and still wearing the mud of the front, and they had come for 7 days of rest. Every man in the sector has heard of that train, and nobody in the dugout knows when the next one goes. Behind the line, in the villages a walk to the rear, there are huts where some of this waiting is done in better company. The first YMCA huts near the American trenches opened within 5 days of the troops going into the line. One of them a few minutes' walk from the first trench, the other a little farther back. The men in the queue call for cigarettes by the color of the box and ask the price of chocolate. Behind the counter, the secretary keeps a steel helmet and a respirator under the shelf. And when the guns start, he winds up the gramophone. By April, there is something new in the huts nearest the line. And it is a donut. The Salvation Army has begun frying them on stoves in the villages just behind the front, and the soldiers' paper reports it under the heading of Pies and Piety. A young worker in one of those towns, the paper says, turns donuts every day for one army and goes into the trenches every night for the other. What reaches the dugout is the smell on a man coming back from the rear, and a story about a cue. The band and the baseball belong to the rear as well, and you will not see either of them this week. In the rest billets, a colonel begs balls and gloves and bats from the nearest YMCA store, and a diamond is laid out on the parade ground with the chaplain standing in as umpire. In the line, the afternoon closes the way it opened, with the light going out of the dugout door and the deck going back into a pocket. What stays out is the newspaper, folded small the way the paper itself tells you to fold it, so that it will fit inside an envelope. Everything else that reaches this trench is ordered up. The rations come because a sergeant signed for them. The relief, because the schedule says so. The mail is the one thing that comes because somebody at the other end wanted it to. It arrives with the dusk, and the afternoon in the dugout has been arranged, without anyone saying so, around the hour when it might. It does not come to you by itself. In this sector, the company mail rides up with the rations, a sack of it on the ration wagon that goes out past Zivray, after dark toward the platoons in their night positions. The sack sits among the bread and the cans. Where the road ends, the sack goes onto a shoulder and walks the rest of the way down the communication trench. So the letters reach the line at the same hour as the food, and in the same hands. The man whose hands they are is the mail orderly. The commanding officer of every company details one soldier to receive and handle the mail of that company, and nothing else. Above him, the division keeps a postal detachment of a lieutenant, a few sergeants and corporals, and 20 privates, chosen where possible from men who were postal clerks before the war. They take the sacks off the train at the railhead and sort them by regiment. The orderly carries what comes to him back to the dugouts and reads out the names in the last of the light. What is on the envelope is not a place. The address is a company, a regiment, and a number, and the number belongs to the Army Post Office, which belongs to the division and moves when the division moves. A letter written to that number finds you in the line, and finds you again a week later somewhere else. Because the number travels, and the express service follows it, the men have an address that is wherever they are. The mail the other way costs nothing. By an act of Congress of the 3rd of October, 1917, a soldier's letter home goes without a stamp. Until spring, the envelope has to carry the word soldier's letter across the corner where the stamp would be, and after that the corner is simply left empty. A man writes on whatever paper he has, on his knee or on a ration box, and when he has finished, he does not seal it. He does not seal it because an officer is going to read it. Every letter from the ranks goes first through the censoring officer of the company, who reads his men's letters home as one more duty of the day. Some men, not wanting an officer to read what they wrote to a girl, try the French post instead, which is forbidden. What the company officer passes goes on to Paris, where the base censor reads every letter that went around the company and a share of those that did not. That office in the first half of January was handling more than 8,000 letters a day. The base censor reads in other tongues as well as English. His office counts 46 languages besides it, Italian and Polish and French most often, and fewer letters in German than in Chinese. The scissors, when they come out, cut the dangerous sentence and not the letter. A man who tries a code, who tells his mother that she knows the maiden name of his grandmother and should think of the town, gets the letter back with a note from the censor that is more amused than angry. What the censor is looking for is the same thing every time, and it is where you are. So you are, on paper, somewhere in France. The rule against naming the place holds even when the correspondents are allowed to print it, and a history of the Yankee Division records that the comfort of writing home was curtailed by that rule, more than by anything else that winter. A man cannot say which village his billet is in or which sector his trench is in. The division's own correspondent argued to the censors that anything he sent by mail was 3 weeks old by the time it saw print, and could not help the Germans, and the censors took many weeks to agree. What men write home, when they are allowed to, is mostly what they are allowed to. They write that the mail is slow, and it is. They write thanks for parcels, and the base censor blames a flood of thank you letters for the Christmas boxes for the rise in his January count. They write that they are well, and the rest is weather and food. Men wrote home about long underwear and a sergeant who would not issue the heavy drawers before summer. Some letters are written before anything has happened at all. On the transports, men of the Yankee Division wrote letters home that were not mailed but handed in, forwarded to Washington, and held there to be released on notice of the convoy's safe arrival on the other side. So the first word a family got from France was written in sight of an American pier. For months afterward, men of the division were still receiving letters that had been sent to them at a training camp in North Carolina, where the people at home believed they were. Parcels are the other half of the mail. The soldier's own dictionary defines the Christmas box as a parcel broken into on the way, and partly filled with wristlets, mufflers, and heavy socks, and arriving in France about the middle of July. When a sack of them does come up, a sergeant calls the names, and the box goes from hand to hand over the heads of the men until it reaches its owner. He opens it slowly in front of everyone, because the opening is the part that is worth having. Inside, in one such box, there was candy, some of it broken, a pack of the cigarettes he smoked at home, and a couple of bars of chocolate, and he filled his pockets with the candy before he ran for formation. What people at home are told to send is what will stand the journey. They are told to learn to knit and to write the address in a round, clear hand, because only then will the sweaters and the socks and the body belts get through. The soldier's paper tells the men to send something back besides a letter, and the thing it suggests is itself. Folded small, it says, and it will go in an envelope and travel free as a letter, like a letter from home and like a letter to home. In the Toul sector, as the spring goes on, a division history notes that the mail began to come more regularly, in the same sentence as the cooking and the distribution of rations. The two things improve together because they travel together. The 1st Division's own history says that a load of mail was worth more than many loads of ammunition, and that the letters never failed to arrive. By the time the orderly has finished reading out the names, the light has gone off the parados. The men who were called go back into the dugout with an envelope, and the men who were not go back to the fire step, and the sack goes down the trench toward the wagon, lighter than it came. The cold here is not an event. It is the ground you stand on, the water in the bottom of the bay, the wet wool on your back, and it does not arrive or leave. It is the condition under which everything else is done. The sector is low and marshy, and in January the trench holds water the way a ditch holds it. You have been wet since the night you came in, and you will be wet when you go out. A body learns to carry that the way it carries the pack, as one more weight that is always there and is noticed only when it shifts. The manual has a great deal to say about how a soldier should sleep, and almost none of it can be done here. Do not sit, lie, or sleep directly on damp ground, it says, because that is sure to chill the body. Make the bed before dark, level the earth, scoop a hollow for the hips, lay straw or dry grass, sleep on the poncho so the damp does not come up from underneath. Every minute spent making a good bed, the manual promises, means about an hour of rest later on. In the forward trench there is no straw and no hollow, and the poncho is on your shoulders because it is raining. So the rule that survives is the plain one. You sleep in what you stand in. The feet are where the manual is most exact, and where the line most disagrees with it. Only the quartermaster's boot, fitted exactly, is to be worn, and a new pair is walked in before it is marched in. Wool socks, light or heavy, are to be worn, and cotton ones are not, unless the surgeon orders them. Socks are to be large enough for the toes to move, and not so loose that they wrinkle. Darned socks, or socks with holes, are not to be worn at all. Clean socks daily. The kit allows 2 pairs on the man, with more in the surplus bag in the rear, and the pair that is not on your feet is wet from yesterday. That is the whole arithmetic of the thing, and nobody in the line needs it explained. What the manual calls the end of a day's march, the line calls the middle of the morning, and the routine is the same on paper. As soon as possible, the feet are to be washed with soap and water, and the man puts on a dry pair of socks and his spare shoes from the surplus kit. The spare shoes are in the rear with the company baggage. The soap is a piece the squad shares, and the water is in a shell hole. The manual says plainly that a soldier cannot march on sore feet, and that sore feet are mostly carelessness. So the feet are washed in cold water, in a hole in the ground, and a pair of socks goes on that was dry an hour ago. In spring, when the New England regiments hold this same ground, the drying of socks stops being a private chore and becomes an order. In some of the regiments, the commanding officer arranges for socks to be washed and dried daily in the rear, and sends them forward with the food details at night. A fresh, dry pair for every man in the front line. The history that records it puts it among the improvements of that season and says that for a while life in the Toul sector was luxurious. That is the spring. In January the arrangement does not exist yet, and the dry pair is the one you have managed to keep dry, which is to say, the one you have not yet put on. There are blisters, and the manual treats them as part of the day's work. A blister is not to be torn open. The manual gives a procedure for it instead, which begins with a pin passed through the flame of a match. Corns and bunions and nails that grow in are to be reported, not endured. Have your name placed on sick report, it says, and apply to the surgeon. Toenails are cut square, close in the middle, and longer at the sides. None of this is medicine, it is upkeep, the way the rifle is upkeep. The one pin in the squad is passed along the step. Sick call is how the army sorts the upkeep from the rest, and it blows every morning wherever the army is. The men who have put their names down go to the surgeon and stand in line to be looked at. The men joke about it the way they joke about every call. The soldier's newspaper prints a verse that year about the one call every man wants to hear, which is pay call, and says that on that day sick call blows in vain, with not a single soul in pain, and the men stand out in the rain for it. The joke is exact. Sick call is a cue, and a cue is something a man can decide not to join. Shaving is the other daily act that the manual requires, and the line permits. Wash once a day if you can, the manual says. If water is short, rub down with a wet towel. If there is none at all, rub down dry. Hair is kept short in the field, because long hair in the field means a dirty head, and the reasoning stops there. Blankets and clothing are to be hung in the sun and beaten with a stick every day. The manual says, and there is no sun in the bay and nowhere to hang them. The razor and the cold water are the same in January. What changes is how long the hands take to warm to the work. The bath is not in the line at all. It waits for the relief, and until then the body makes do with the mess kit and the shell hole. When a company goes back, the quartermaster's trucks are drawn up by a roadside, and one man who rode it down afterward stood among hundreds of men naked and in every stage of undress, waiting their turn. You walk up to the truck, wait, and take the nearest size of everything. Then you go aside, find a spot, and change, and throw the old clothes onto the piles already there. Shirts with shirts, coats with coats, shoes with shoes. The piles are carried off later to be cleaned and mended and issued again to someone else. That man wrote that clean socks and underwear and a tight new uniform were a pleasant sensation that needed only a bath to make it complete, and the bath came after. That is the whole of the rear as the body knows it. Dry socks, new wool, water, and a night of lying down. Then the turn comes round again, and the company goes back up the communication trench in the dark, and the water in the bay is where it was. What the body carries up is not rest, because there was not enough of that. It is the memory of having been dry, which lasts as far as the first gap in the duckboards. None of it is written in the regimental history as hardship. It is written as a list of improvements, and the first item on the list, in the spring, is one pair of socks. The first thing the ears learn in a quiet sector is that quiet is a sound. It has a texture, and it changes through the night. The understanding that neither side fires much here was made between the French and the Germans before you came. And it is not written anywhere. It is simply something the ground sounds like. A battery far to the rear fires a single round, and the quiet closes back over the place where the sound was. What you are listening to, most of the night, is the absence of the next one. The men who came into this line in January heard it before they saw it. On the night the division took over, a correspondent stood by the road north of the village and watched the platoons go up in small squads, silently, toward the line. A raw wind came down from that direction, and it carried occasional sounds that he set down as resembling the falling of steel plates on the wooden floor of a long corridor. A half-moon ringed with mist made the night look gray. That is the sound of the sector from the road, before anyone in the column has seen a German trench, gunfire, far enough off to be mistaken for something else. Closer in, the guns sort themselves, and you learn to tell them apart without being told. The French who held the line before the Americans taught the first platoons 2 words for it. The departure, which is your own shell going out from the batteries behind you, a flat report and a sound drawing away, and the arrival, which is theirs, and comes the other way. In the spring, when the New England regiments are here, an officer wrote down the ordinary reaction to a round going over towards some village or battery in the rear. A little hate going over, The man on the step would say, without much lifting his head, and go back to what he was doing. What the ears are kept for, in a sector like this one, is not the guns, it is the alarm. The warning for gas is built to be heard without any man's lungs behind it. The main instrument is a horn worked by a cylinder of compressed air, opened by a handcock or a foot pedal, and a sentry stands at each one ready to sound it the moment he smells or sees anything. The sector commander places them so that there is one every 400 yards along the front. You know where the nearest one is by having walked to it in the dark. Behind that row stands a second spaced every 600 yards and set back so that each horn sits behind the gap between two in front, checkerboard fashion. Between the horns, anything that rings will do, and the orders list what has been used. Bells, lengths of rail hung so they vibrate when struck, empty shell cases. The thing that matters is that a man can beat on it with a mask already over his face. So each bay has something of iron hanging in it and something to hit it with. In the village behind the line, the instrument is older than the war. Above the ruins of the hamlet, the correspondent wrote in January, stood the steeple of the old stone church, from which it was customary to ring the alarm when the Germans sent over their shells of gas. So the church bell of Ansauville rings now for the mask. There is one bell, and you learn its voice in the first days. When it rings at night, nobody asks what it means. The mask itself is on your chest, because it has to be. Within 2 miles of the front line, the orders say, every respirator is worn in the alert position, the bag strapped high and the flap loose, and there is no other position allowed. Farther back the bag may ride on the hip, and farther back still it need only be within reach. But you are not farther back. It has been on your chest since the support line, and it stays there when you sleep. The bag is heavy enough to be felt with every breath, which is the point of where it sits. The drill sets a time for getting it on, and the time is the number in the sector that everyone can repeat. Donning the respirator from the alert position in 6 seconds is known as the standard adjustment test, and every man in the division has been run through it until he can do it without looking. The flap up, the chin in, the straps over, and the breath already going in through the box. It is longer than it sounds when you are counting it, and shorter than it sounds when you are doing it with cold hands. Nobody argues with the drill because there is nothing to argue with. When the alarm comes, it comes at night, and it comes at about the same hour. The artillerymen of the division that followed yours, holding the same sector in the spring, wrote that every night in the small hours after midnight the German shell would come over with gas mixed in, to the accompaniment of alarm gongs and klaxons along the whole front. At first, they wrote, an alarm would be taken up and spread for miles by the horns, one post hearing the next and sounding its own. Everybody put on his mask and stood in it, waited for the word to be passed to take it off. That is the procedure, and on the first nights, it is followed to the letter. Later, the same men wrote that the division became, in their word, acclimated, and that no one worried any more about distant alarms. A horn in the next bay is answered. A horn a mile off is noted and left alone, because shell gas is local, and a burst in one place means nothing for a place a little way off unless the wind is going that way. The ears that have been here a while sort the alarms the way they sort the guns, by distance and direction, and the mask comes out for the near ones. Nobody tells you when you have crossed from the first kind of hearing to the second. One night you simply do not reach for the bag, and you are right. The false alarm is the commonest one. A sentry smells something or thinks he does, and the horn goes, and the line masks, and the word comes back down after a while that there was nothing in it. The mask comes off, and the air, ordinary a minute before, is the best thing that has happened to you all night. It is better to mask a battalion for nothing than to leave it breathing the one time the smell is real, and the men agree and say what they think of the sentry. Out in front, the other sound of the night is the one with light attached to it. A flare climbs, opens, and hangs over the wire, and along the step everyone stops where he is until it is down. That is the listening post's business, and it is an hour off yet. For now the line is quiet in the way this line is quiet, with a gun going somewhere to the east and the bay holding its breath after it. At the corner of the traverse, in its strong wooden box, the horn stands with its cylinder charged, and the sentry's hand rests on the lid. The afternoon thins out the way it came in without any one moment you could point to. The gray over the Voivre goes a shade darker, and the cold that sat in the trench all day starts to climb the walls. You have been listening to this ground for hours, and it has given you very little. Now the light is leaving it, and the trench that slept through the day begins, quietly, to move. The last of the light is on the hill. Monsec stands up out of the plain on the German side, dry and high, and from its top the other side has watched every road behind this line since the morning. That is the reason the day here belongs to stillness. Nothing crosses the open while the hill can see it, and the hill can see it until the light is gone. The dusk is the first hour in which the line is allowed to be busy, and it uses the hour. The company takes the fire step as the dark comes on. From now until daylight, everybody in the front line is dressed, armed, and at the alert, and that sentence is the whole order of the night. The books written afterward describe the morning version of this, before dawn, in detail. The evening version leaves less on paper. You stand on the step with the others, the rifle laid across the parapet, and look at a plane that is losing its shape. Nobody talks. One man along the bay coughs into his sleeve and stops. The respirator comes round to the front of your chest if it has ridden anywhere else during the day. The overcoat goes back on over everything. Your hands are already stiff, and the knuckles do not bend all the way, so the last two buttons take longer than they should. The collar goes up, and the scarf, if you still have it, goes inside it. Nobody hurries you. There is nothing in this hour that can be hurried. Supper is not here, and it is not coming while anything can be seen. The kitchen sits well back, behind the support line, and the men who carry from it do not come forward while the slope is in daylight. That is the rule of the ground, not of the cook. So the one hot meal of the day is a night thing, and it starts towards you only after the last light has gone off the hill. The carriers come up the communication trench in single file. The walls of the boyo are held with wicker, the French way, and the duck boards along its floor have gaps in them where a board has gone. In the dark, you step into the gap and the water takes your leg to the knee. Where the frost and thaw have worked at the wicker, the walls have been pushed inward and the trench is narrower than it was built. A man with a marmite on his back learns the places by feel and still finds a new gap. Behind the carriers, the work parties are forming. A part of the company is not in the trench on any given night but out in front of it, and this is the hour they are made up. There is wire to be repaired, and new wire to be laid, and the trenches themselves to be improved where the day's water has undone them. On the wire go tin cans, strung so that anything passing through will rattle them. The same work was done last night and will be done tomorrow, because one night's rain and a few shells undo it as fast as it is done. The engineer's work goes on at night with infantry hands, and none of it is finished or meant to be. You have carried pickets and coils to the wire on more than one night, and you know the weight of a roll of it on your shoulder before you pick it up again. The division's orders on this point are not gentle. No man's land is not to be left to the other side. It is to be patrolled, and the line is not to wait for the Germans to open the night. So a patrol is made up along with the work parties. The manual's patrol is anything from a few men to 16. The leader takes a map, a compass, and the forms for his report, and a whistle he does not mean to use. Packs and rolls stay behind because a man going out goes light. Before the patrol leaves the trench, it is given the password for the night. The password is issued the way the regulations say it should be, and tonight the regulations are kept. The corporal of the guard has his list of posts and the names against them, in 2 copies, the sergeant holding the other. A man is not moved from the post he is given without an order from above. The word itself is passed low, and it is not to be spoken to anyone but the man who relieves you or the man with the right to ask. That is the whole of it. The relief comes up the same trench the carriers used a little later, in the full dark. Companies trade line and reserve on a set turn, and tonight it is another company's turn to come forward. You hear them before you see them, the water, the wicker creaking, a canteen against a rifle. When a flare goes up, they stop where they stand, a single file of men frozen in the boyo, and start again when the light is down. They take the bays to your left, and a sergeant moves along the step, placing them. Out in front, the Rue du Mad runs along the bottom of no man's land, and the far bank rises steeply on the German side. That bank is cut with their trenches and their machine gun positions, and you know the places by daylight and cannot see them now. A fog comes up off the stream on these nights and lies gray across the ground between the 2 wires. The sentries on the step look into it. There is nothing else to look into. Half of the platoon is told to lie down in the shelters and sleep if it can. The rest take the watch, and the watch will change in its turn through the night. In the sector the division held in February, before this one, the first night was ordered the same way. Half of each platoon told to lie down and sleep if it could, and the rest stand in watch, and the order has not changed with the ground. Sleep, if it comes in the clothes you stand in. The trench has been doing this for years, and it does not alter the order for the weather. The first flare of the night goes up from somewhere on the other side. It climbs, opens, and hangs, and the fog under it turns white, and the wire stands up out of the fog in every strand. Then it is down, and the dark closes back over the place where it was. The artillerymen of the division that follows yours keep, in the spring, a rocket of their own. For the other purpose, a 6-star red one that means a call for the guns, and a relay post repeats it so that every battery can see it. Nobody on this step sends one up tonight. Out past the parapet, the cans on the wire have not made a sound. The post is not in the line, it is out in front of it, along the shallow sap that runs toward the wire. And it is the nearest thing this company owns to the other side. You go out to it in the dark behind the corporal, bent low, a hand on the wet wall of it. The flare that was up when you left the trench is down by the time you reach the hole. That is the first thing you learn out here. The distance is short, and the light is shorter. The regulations have a name for every size of post, and this is the smallest. A Cossack post is 4 men with a sentinel standing. The rest lie close behind him and give him his reliefs. A sentry squad is larger and puts up a double sentinel and keeps the others resting near enough to be roused without a voice. Tonight the whole holds the corporal and a handful of men, and the sentinel is you. There is an order from the Corps about this, written in the spring. A group out in front of the line is to be no more than 25 men, and most are much smaller. The same order sets how far from his group a sentinel may stand, and the answer is not far. You are within a low call of the men behind you, and that is the point. The book says a sentinel on the line of observation stands no farther than 50 feet from his group. The book also says how the post keeps touch with the line behind it, by signal, by a runner, and in some places by a wire that runs back along the sap to a telephone. Tonight there is no wire. Where sentinels stand in pairs, they stand near enough to speak to each other in an ordinary voice, and they do not use it. At night, by the same book, the groups also patrol the line of observation between one post and the next. The tour is 2 hours on the post out of 6. That is the rule of field service, and it is the shape of the night. Your name is on the corporal's list against this post, with the hour you went up, that long, in a hole in the ground, looking at a strip of fog and a line of wire. Then a man comes and takes your place, and you go back, and in time you come up again. The night is long enough to hold the whole rotation and have dark left over. 3 reliefs are found for every post, and none of them sleeps on it. You do not sleep, and the cold is the reason before duty is. You have been dressed since yesterday, and the coat that was wet at dusk is wet now, only colder. The hole has water in the bottom, and you stand on what is above it. Your feet have been the same temperature as the water for some while. Nobody has told you to stay awake, the ground has. All night the flares go up, from one side or the other, because some sentry along the line thought he saw something move out there. When the light comes, you stop. You do not drop, because a moving shape is what a flare is for. You stand still in the posture you had, and you hold it until the dark comes back. The light is green-white and it drifts, and the shadows of the wire pickets walk slowly across the ground while it falls. Then it is out, and you let your breath go. Eyes that have grown used to the night begin to see things, and some of them are not there. An officer of the division set that down of its first nights in the line in February, in another sector, and it holds here. The dark patch that has been moving for a minute turns out to be the wire. The shape at the edge of the fog was a picket at dusk, and is a picket now. You learn to look a little to one side of what you want to see, and to let it stay where it is. Most of what moves in no man's land at night is the fog. The rule for a man who hears someone coming is short. Stand ready, halt them, and send word to the commander of the post. It is for him to challenge and to make out who they are. The book gives the distance at which a party is halted, and it is 30 paces. In this fog you will not see that far, so you halt what you hear, and you halt it low. A loud challenge tells the other side where the post is. A low challenge tells the man in front of you that he is expected. Near the middle of your tour, the corporal touches your arm. The patrol that went out at dusk is coming in. They have gone slowly, feeling the ground ahead of them, stopping at every sound. They reached the German wire and met nobody and came back. They were given the password before they left the trench, and now, halted on the far side of the fog, one of them gives it in a whisper that the corporal has to lean forward to hear. Then they file past you into the sap, wet to the waist, and the wire behind them is as empty as it was. The respirator stays on your chest all night, the flap opened, the way it has to be this close to the line. Along the trench behind you there are horns and gongs with one man posted at each, to sound if the air changes. There was a night, the autumn before and in another sector, when a green German rocket was read as a gas signal, and the masks went on down the whole line before the word came back that it was nothing. Tonight the air smells of wet ground and nothing else. Then the tour is over. The relief comes up the sap behind you and stops short, the way the book says, and you bring the rifle up and wait. He comes the last step alone. You tell him in a low voice what the post has seen, which is the patrol and the fog and a flare or two, and you tell him the word. He takes the place where you were standing. You are already colder for having moved. Back along the sap, into the trench, along the base to the shelter. Half the platoon is asleep in there, and the rest have the watch. And you lie down in the clothes you have worn since yesterday, with the respirator on your chest, and you do not quite sleep. The flares keep on, and the light of each comes down the steps and goes again. Somewhere the work party is coming in, quiet, putting the tools away. Before the light there will be one count of who is missing, and the step will fill again, and everyone will stand on it until dawn. That is where this day began. Out past the parapet the cans on the wire have not moved. Your rifle is across the parapet, where the next man can reach it. The 1st Division did not stay, and was not meant to. At the end of March, the 26th came up the same roads the 1st had marched in on 2 months before. Some of the infantry in French lorries, the wagons and the guns on foot. The relief went the way reliefs go in a quiet sector, and the way this one had gone when the French handed it over in the snow. The new men standing a night on the step beside the old ones. Then a platoon at a time, then a company, then a battalion, until one night the line belonged to somebody else from end to end. Within a few days of arriving, the 26th had the sector to itself. The men who had learned the Ansauville line walked back down the communication trenches and out of it, and men from Connecticut and Massachusetts stood on the same fire steps that night and found the water in the same places. The Connecticut regiment that took over the ground in front of Seicheprey went into mud that the 1st had spent all winter pumping, and the division history says so plainly. They were in it from the last day of March. The 26th held the sector on into the summer, week after week. Somewhere in the middle of that stay there was a morning at Seicheprey that earned a name, and that morning is not this night. It was one morning out of 90, and the other 89 were nights like the one you have listened to. By the end of June the division was gone north, and the sector went on being held by someone, as it had been held by someone since the autumn of 1914. So this is what the quiet sector was. Not the place where nothing happened, but the place where the same things happened every night. The stand to in the dark, with nobody speaking. The food coming up on somebody's back and arriving cold. The flare and the stillness under it, and the walk back down the boyo to a dugout that smelled of the last man's candle. An army learned its trade here by doing the dull part of it over and over, in water, with its boots on. The people who wrote its history afterwards hurried through the winter to get to the summer, because the summer had battles in it. The winter had only nights. What is left of those nights is mostly paper. Division histories written the year after by men who wanted it on the record that their battalion had gone into the line on such a date and come out on such another. A battery's diary that complains about the water more than it complains about the enemy. A newspaper printed in Paris for the men in the line, with a dictionary of their own words in it, so that the people at home would know what a Christmas box was and why it always arrived in July. The Army's own manuals, which say how long a sentry should stand and how many seconds a mask should take, and which the sentries read about as often as you would expect. And photographs. The Signal Corps men went everywhere with their cameras, including into the front line on quiet days. And what they brought back is not the war that gets pictured. It is men asleep on a fire step in daylight with their helmets tipped over their eyes. A cook bent over a rolling kitchen in a farmyard, steam going up past a barn. A sentry with his chin on the parapet, looking at nothing in particular, because there was nothing in particular to look at, and that was the point of him. They are dated, most of them, to the day, and the dates are the dates of nothing. No attack, no raid, no name on a map. A Tuesday in February at Ansauville. A morning in April near Book. A line of men in overcoats coming out of a communication trench with their packs on, squinting, finished with it for a week. The captions say which regiment and which village, and nothing else, because nothing else happened, and the men in them are not looking at the camera. They are looking at the road back. Almost all of it was nights when nothing happened. That was the war for most of the men who were in it. And it is the part that does not get told. Sleep well. Whatever the dark is doing outside your window tonight, you can take your boots off, and nobody is coming to wake you for the second relief. Good night.